Hello everybody and welcome to Grey History. With the terror commenced and with the dechristianization campaign around the corner, I thought now was the perfect time to unwrap Christmas in revolutionary France. From early traditions to the forced closure of churches, there's plenty to examine in this less than jolly tale. So, in this special episode, we're going to look at how Christmas changed after 1789, its traditions, its celebrations, and even its place on the calendar. We'll also be previewing some of the controversial elements of the dechristianization campaign, although, to be clear, we'll be saving that story for next year. Now, before we get into it, let me wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. If you're not celebrating Christmas, well, happy holidays, happy Hanukkah, happy whatever occasion you're celebrating this festive season. I wish you a great 2025 and I cannot wait to explore the terror together. Lastly, a humongous thank you to members of the Grey History community for keeping this sleigh in the air. I couldn't do it without you. So with that, let's get into this Christmas special, and I'll be back on New Year's Eve with the show trials of the terror. Either episode 81, the trial of Queen Marie Antoinette, or episode 82, the trial of the Girondins, dependent on your early access. Of course, if you can't wait for more Grey History, you can give yourself an early Christmas present by joining the community on Patreon. Becoming a true revolutionary will give you access to the Queen's trial right now, not to mention hours of fantastic bonus content and an ad-free feed. With a 7-day free trial and new monthly and annual membership options, why not come and join the festive party and support the show today? It's the best present out there, and you don't even need to be on Santa's nice list. There's links in the show notes, on the website, or just Google Grey History Patreon. I look forward to welcoming you personally. "'Twas the morning of Christmas, in a land proud and old, when Clovis the king sought the faith to uphold. The waters were blessed, the cathedral gleamed bright, as the Franks hailed their king in God's holy light. With princes in tow, the vows he did say, and the cross claimed his heart on that Christmas day. Bow to your Lord, the bishop did call, and the kingdom of heaven embraced them all." Such was the first French Christmas. Well, sort of. This Christmas of either 496 or 508, depending on your sources, is undoubtedly a consequential and historic event. It was then, at the beginning of the 6th century, that the Frankish king Clovis was baptized. Joined by thousands of his subjects, the first king of the Franks had accepted the Christian faith. Doing so on Christmas Day itself, Clovis had unknowingly shaped the future of the world. Critically, the founder of the famous Merovingian dynasty rejected other, more popular forms of Christianity when he specifically adopted Catholicism. Then still a minor Christian doctrine amongst many Frankish lords, Clovis had bound the French crown not only to Christ, but the Catholic Church in particular. The two were forever intertwined. Over the next millennium, Catholicism grew to dominate every aspect of French life. Christmas was no exception. Rivaled only by Easter in the early church, the festivities of Christmas became the event of the year. Given this, it's not surprising that France, and indeed all of Europe, began the process of inventing Christmas traditions. What appears to us as age-old customs were once innovations, tested and adapted from one region to the next. Of these, one of the most iconic is the nativity scene, an artistic display representing the birth of Jesus. Generally, the first nativity scene is credited to Francis of Assisi in 1223. It was then that the future Italian saint, with French ancestry, staged the first nativity in central Italy. Initially, Francis had used actors to recreate scenes from Jesus' birth. But as their popularity spread, it became common for nativities to replace real people with life-sized statues. Models were made of wood, wax, or even papier-mâché, representing not only Christ and his parents, but a whole host of people, angels, and animals. Like all art, these exhibitions soon became a game of one-upmanship amongst the wealthy, with generous patrons sponsoring their own elaborate scenes. In what I suppose is our equivalent to which neighbour has the better set of Christmas lights, people would attempt to outdo the baby Jesus next door. As such, statues were soon blessed with precious metals, intricate carvings, and the attention of masters in their field. Now, lest you be upset that such competitive spirit has been lost this Christmas, take comfort. Places such as the Polish city of Krakow still hold annual nativity scene competitions. Yet, despite originating in Italy, the practice of nativity scenes eventually took root across Europe. As the 17th century progressed, displays became common in France, aided by a couple of different factors. Firstly, religious orders like the Jesuits and the Franciscans helped to promote their popularity. I'm not sure if the Franciscans were particularly enthusiastic, given St. Francis's role in creating both their order and nativity scenes in general, but I like to think that it was a matter of secret, sinful pride. Jokes aside, the experience of France was also shaped by the wars of religion, as the Catholic faithful clashed with the Protestant heretics. In a kingdom devastated by internal divisions, authorities encouraged nativity scenes as a way to promote and reinforce Catholic identities. Make note of that, because it will become important. Now, to be clear, while some Protestant churches either embraced or eventually adopted nativity scenes, others weren't supportive. The French Huguenots were Calvinists and often took a stricter interpretation of the Bible's second commandment. Forbidden from creating idols or representations of God, one could conclude that papier-mâché baby Jesus was also prohibited. Consequently, with French Protestants viewing these displays as heretical, Catholic authorities were free to use them as a tool for community cohesion. The fact that they assisted in spreading the faith through visual means to France's many illiterate inhabitants was just another benefit. However, this is a French Revolution podcast, and we all know the merriness of Christmas was about to be stolen by revolutionary Grinches. Come the outbreak of the Revolution, Christmas was at the apex of the French calendar. This would soon change. Even in 1789, it was clear that reforms were on the agenda. By December that year, the revolution was not yet at war with the church, but church lands had been nationalised to help pay the kingdom's debt. Although the seizure of church property was a controversial measure, it did at least have some supporters amongst the clergy, and an irreversible break with Rome had not yet materialised. However, the Christmas of 1789 reiterated the significant challenges that the revolution would present. On Christmas Eve, the National Assembly passed laws granting full legal and political rights to Christian minorities. Henceforth, French Protestants were eligible to hold office, irrespective of their creed or ethnicity. Furthermore, the Declaration of the Rights of Man had granted them liberty of conscience, and complete religious liberty was clearly a priority for many in the National Assembly. Thus, while the deputies had delivered Christmas cheer for French Protestants, sincere Catholics weren't so jolly. But if the breach with the Church had not yet occurred, 7 months later, the revolutionaries well and truly burnt the turkey. In mid-July 1790, the National Assembly passed the Civil Constitution of the Clergy. These reforms completely upended the administration of the Church, simplifying dioceses, introducing elections, and curtailing the powers of the Pope. In addition to earlier reforms, such as abolishing nunneries and monasteries, priests were also required to swear an oath to the new constitution. In an instant, the clergy was split in two. Roughly half refused to swear the oath. As discussed at length in the podcast, this division between church and state would be the source of great friction between the revolutionaries on one hand and the king, clergy, and Catholic citizens on the other. Subsequent royal vetoes protecting refractory clergy only inflamed tensions further. Over the next 2 years, hostilities increased dramatically. The outbreak of war exacerbated the situation, and the clergy was soon seen as the enemy within. With priests allegedly a fifth column, it's no coincidence that clerics were a prime target in the prison massacres of September 1792. By December that year, the authorities of the new republic were ready to take an increasingly firm stance. Christmas was in the crosshairs. In December 1792, the Paris Commune did the unthinkable. Christmas was cancelled. On the grounds that ceremonies were the source of disorder and superstition, Town Hall attempted to ban midnight mass. On Christmas Eve, officials proclaimed that the Parisian churches would be closed from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., effectively cancelling the service later that evening. Although the capital was hardly known for its religious sensibilities, this was outrageous. Attending church for midnight mass was perhaps the longest and most important of French Christmas traditions. The idea that politicians could suddenly halt proceedings was utterly unacceptable. In short order, devout Parisians were gathering in the streets, compelling priests to open doors and holding midnight mass anyway. Responsible officials were also hounded, and some were even threatened by crowds. Singing hymns and reciting prayers, their defiance was unmissable. It also warranted a response. The new year had new opportunities, especially with the commencement of the Terror. By autumn 1793, anti-clericalism was rampant in the halls of power. With talk of conspiracy consuming the Jacobins and the Vendée Civil War illustrating the betrayal of the priests, it was perhaps a matter of when, not if, violence followed words. Commencing in regional France, the nation saw the outbreak of what historians term the dechristianization campaign. Now, as I said in the intro, the scope of this episode is not on the why, the how, or even the who of this controversial chapter. We'll be covering the dechristianization campaign in all its fascinating and divisive details next year. For this episode, it's sufficient to say that these anti-clerical actions were important, especially as they were replicated elsewhere. With both the capital and other departments taking inspiration, dechristianization was soon in full swing. In the departments which bore the brunt of this campaign, churches were closed, priests were detained, and new cults were promoted by authorities. Likewise, crosses were erased from public view, not only on religious buildings, but also cemeteries, gravestones, and works of communal art. At times, ceremonial suppression could be severe, such as the public guillotining of statues of saints. In other instances, church steeples were removed as their heights offended equality while precious metals were melted to fund the war effort. With priests encouraged to marry and denounce their wicked past, others took the less sacrilegious path of simply retiring early. Of course, these measures provoked a response, both from the people and fellow revolutionaries. Contentious even amongst the Jacobins themselves, that is a story for another time. Now, what matters for us is that by late 1793, the dechristianization campaign was in full swing. With our focus this episode, I'm sure it will come as little surprise to hear that in 1793, Christmas was well and truly cancelled. The year prior, the Paris Commune had already attempted to ban midnight mass. Now, Town Hall was filled with some of the most passionate ultra-revolutionaries, armed with both zeal and the support of the law. Although the legal grounds of the campaign are complex, practically speaking, municipalities did have the authority to close and regulate churches, and thus the celebration of Christmas. While churches remained open in some sections of France, the communes of Paris, Strasbourg, and other major cities often closed their doors. Indeed, in the wake of the Federalist revolts, authorities across the country were filled with partisan Jacobins, generally inclined to follow the lead of the capital. So, Christmas was cancelled, at least for many citizens in large urban communities. Furthermore, the Reign of Terror did much to dissuade a repeat of forcing churches open, as had happened in 1792. Remember, by late 1793, all suspects could now be arrested, and for misdeeds as simple as defaming the authorities or associating with counter-revolutionary groups. Furthermore, priests merely suspected of breaking the law were subject to strict punishments. In such circumstances, defying the government and attending midnight mass was more than enough to be placed on the commune's naughty list. That said, the bravest of the faithful carried on anyway. While churches in the capital were officially closed, there appears to be a loophole for a handful of smaller chapels. At these, contemporaries record innumerable crowds waiting for the opportunity to attend a Christmas Mass. There, ceremonies were held, drawing in large crowds from the countryside who had nowhere else to go. Needless to say, these chapels were closed shortly thereafter. Yet, if Christmas was banned in 1793 by the authorities of many major centres, it would be remiss of me not to point out that Christmas was in fact suppressed in more ways than one. In another topic for the new year, we will turn our attention to the revolutionary calendar, an attempt to completely redefine the rhythms of French life. Prior to the Revolution, the French used the Gregorian calendar, the one that most countries use today. You know, Monday to Sunday, January to December, years dated since the birth of Christ. The calendar. Well, this was proving problematic. Historian Robert Palmer explains why. The old calendar had the disadvantage of keeping people's minds upon the Christian tradition. It was a framework to the Christian life, almost impossible to escape from. Its Sundays drew men's minds to church, its Fridays to fasting, its saints' days to models of piety and to superstition. Its cycle of Lent and Easter, Advent and Christmas set a religious stamp on the passage of time itself. And of course, its method of counting years implied that the birth of Christ was the supreme event in human annals. On October 5, 1793, the convention abolished the Christian era for public purposes in France. Replacing the calendar of their ancestors, the French built something altogether bonkers. Again, this will be the focus of greater exploration next year, using our calendar, but some noticeable highlights are as follows. Firstly, weeks were now 10 days long, and 3 of these 10-day weeks made a month. There were still 12 months in a year, but experts at quick maths might realise that that's only 360 days. At the end of the year, the remaining days were filled out with holidays to keep the year aligned with a solar calendar. That said, the year did not start on our 1st of January, but rather in late September on the autumn equinox, roughly marking the anniversary of the French Republic. Perhaps most famously, the 10-day weeks only had a one-day weekend, which was about as popular as you might expect. Now, for our purposes, what matters is that the introduction of this calendar literally erased Christmas. The whole point of it was to cancel Sundays and Christian holidays, and so Christmas became just like any other day. Demonstrating this, the revolutionary authorities kept on working, holding meetings and conducting usual business. In fact, workers employed in industries relating to national defence were explicitly forbidden from observing Christmas. So, Christmas wasn't only cancelled through the closure of churches, it was literally wiped off the calendar. To digress for a moment, each of the Republican calendar's days had a specific name, theoretically linked to rural life and the agricultural economy. The name for the day of Christmas was Dog. Personally, as a dog lover, I don't actually mind it. There's a lot worse names to choose from. I mean, for comparison, Christmas Eve was named Sulphur. To digress even further, I'm not sure what to make of French opinions of the Americans when deciding to call July 4th tobacco. However, before we wrap up this little exploration of revolutionary Christmases, I want to come full circle. Nativity scenes. If it seemed a little odd that we started this episode focused on statues of little baby Jesus, it's not because I'm a secret collector. Instead, nativity scenes became an important means of both keeping one's faith and defying the authorities at a time when Christmas was a no-no. Remember, such displays had once been promoted as a means to reinforce Catholic identities. Consequently, they had the same purpose in revolutionary France. In the south of the country, noticeably in Marseille and surrounding areas, citizens started to recreate the Nativity. Barred from their usual displays at their local church, the inhabitants had to improvise. Unable to replicate life-size statues at home, Catholics created miniature versions, made of clay, wood, or other materials to keep the tradition alive. In fact, I've seen one claim that people might have used bread dough in some instances, but this doesn't really make sense given the price of bread in southern France, especially in 1793. Remember, courtesy of the British blockade, the Republic's south was in desperate need of food, and short supplies had been a major hampering factor in the Southern Federalist revolts just months earlier. Whatever the precise materials, the faithful now had a private way to nurture the Christmas spirit. With revolutionary authorities officially maintaining the freedom of religion, such private practices were completely legal. Now, in an ironic twist, while miniature nativities could escape the authorities, they could not escape the revolution itself. After years of promoting the Third Estate, such displays reflected the times. In addition to baby Jesus and his parents, ordinary people started to feature in the scene. Professions such as fishermen were common thanks to their biblical connections, but so too were butchers, bricklayers, and other working people. With time, the ensemble expanded, with mayors, village priests, and a range of extra characters making an appearance. So too did unorthodox animals, although I'm doubtful that lobsters were included prior to the release of Love Actually. Interestingly, in the late 1790s, the creation of these miniatures became more commercialised, and a whole tradition of little nativities continued despite the later resurgence of public worship. As such, The popularity of these santons, or little saints, remains today. The south of France in particular is now famous for its santon markets, and their presence in the family home is seen as a timeless Christmas tradition. In short, they cancelled the cheer, banning the feasts and even the end of the year. No carols, no bells, no candles aglow, a season erased by revolutionary blow. Yet joy still lingered in hearts and in song, defying the rules. Christmas stayed strong. With kindness and warmth the embers survived, and after the night, Christmas revived. Thank you for listening to this special episode on Revolutionary Christmas, and Merry Christmas to you. I'll be back with a New Year's Eve present containing the next instalment of the Terror's political trials. Of course, if you'd like to give a gift to your favourite French Revolutionary podcaster, there's two ways that you can help support the show this festive season. Firstly, you can become a member on Patreon, enjoying all the perks of the community, and secondly, you can leave a one-off donation through Ko-Fi. Links to both websites can be found in the show notes and on greyhistory.com. Of course, another way that you can help the podcast is by spreading revolutionary cheer. If you know anyone who might want a new history podcast in 2025, please recommend Grey History. As always, thank you so much for your support. Stay safe, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and have a fantastic holiday season.